As autumn descends, the apples ripen. About 2 weeks before the harvest, the apple's food supply is cut off, and the apples become sweeter. Most apples are harvested by hand, primarily in September and October. As for the coming gallery exhibition, the harvest was imminent for our fruitful twins as they sketch ideas for the show's centerpiece. A great fire. One that would consume all they had done before, every work, every idea. The gallery itself would be razed to the ground, a sacrifice necessary to ensure new growth. And from the ashes, the theme from the white, white day. Judy and Jack looked over their creation, feeling neither happy nor sad, a sort of sober contentment or confident sobriety, the realization that descending a mountain is no less challenging than climbing it. In other words, the stage was set. Tomorrow would be their final performance. For Proust, a day of realization. For the people, however, it would simply be another day. Unknowingly, they had already decided the outcome of tomorrow's events, and so, for now, with great hope and anticipation, all Proust can do is wait. Shut up. They came in late. They took cheap talk on good credit and laid their foundations on soft P receipts. Questioning their surroundings for a moment, they were unperplexed, and the walls were phlegmatic. Discourse, a torso of clay and honey, a garrison of ideas. The mirror hung from poplar via dog leash. It was not so much the image that caught them, but their reflection in it.
It was a try to get a cab to get back home. It was a white hot day for Judy and Jack. Paying the bills when the customers are still waiting for days now. The boiler's been out of whack. The dealers will pay, but we will never succumb to the proceeds.
Shut up. This time it's for kids. And what better time to hark back to your childhood years? The promise of spring and the bells' cheerful sound. The granite you once stood so firmly upon. How far you have come. But at least you think the beer tastes good. And with the way things are going, the future looks bright. A second house in the countryside, a telephone call, a promising harvest, and a holiday abroad.
It was a dream to get a cab to get back home. It was a white hot day for Judy and Jack. Paying the bills while the customers are still waiting for days now. The boiler's been out of whack. The dealers will pay, but we will never succumb to the proceeds. They give me a heart attack. It's getting harder to act. Now I'm old and aging with impatience.
For a long time, I went to bed early and dreamt clearly. I saw an insect, a sort of ant-like creature with wings, though, judging from its movements, it did not fly often. It was crawling across the kitchen floor, and spreading across the floor was a sort of tangled mess of string. The string wasn't arranged in a dense formation, but more like if you were to take a pen and scribble frantically for about 5 seconds. Whenever the insect was on the floor, it moved with a sort of fearful haste, as though it was desperately searching for something. It would meander about like this until it reached a piece of string. Then, all of a sudden, its movements would become far more complacent. It would crawl onto the string and diligently follow the aimless path laid out before it. And as it was doing this, it would pause now and then to clean itself, or at least I assume it was cleaning itself. These pauses over time became more and more frequent and more elaborate. The gestures with which it would reach round to clean its arms, legs, and wings would become more and more dramatic until eventually, in a sort of bodily spasm, it would lose its footing on the string and fall back onto the kitchen floor. Then, as though none of this had happened, it would once more begin its desperate, sporadic search. I watched it repeat this process for about 10-20 minutes before realizing that without intervention it would carry on indefinitely. And my interest suddenly transformed into sympathy, and I sought to free the insect from this eternal prison. I brushed it gently with my index finger, flipping it onto its back, then, placing my finger just above it, its flailing legs would take hold, and I could carry it unharmed to the window. As I was sending it on its way, I noticed that outside there was a mass of people, all moving in the same direction. Curious to see what it was that had brought all these people together, I left the house and joined the crowd. Then suddenly I realized it was the day of the exhibition. Judy and Jack, the twins I had nurtured and raised for 7 years, would finally have their moment in the limelight. I eagerly followed the crowd, chatting with strangers and discussing the prospects of the coming show until finally we arrived at the gallery. The crowd, quite suddenly, fell silent. There was an intake of breath that I feel to this day has not yet been exhaled. Where once the gallery so proudly stood was now just the skeletal remains covered in a snow-like veil of ash. There was a reflective moment of silence whilst the people assembled their opinions. There were exclamations of displeasure from those who found the loss of the building upsetting. Some chose to vocalize their confusion, whilst others, after a satisfied chuckle, proclaimed the work to be an act of genius. I, however, still remained curious, and after much of the crowd dispersed, a small percentage decided to explore the wreckage. Naturally, I joined them. Much of what we saw was, as you'd expect, the burnt-out remains of an art gallery, though there were a couple of surprises. An enormous church bell, its charred metal burrowing its way into the gallery's foundations. A melted mirror, its reflections warped unrecognizably. There were deer moving through the wreckage, stags with fantastic antlers and booming mating calls. Then, ahead of us we saw 2 figures. I quickly recognized them. On the left stood Judy, and on the right Jack. They were completely motionless, each with a clenched fist held over their heart. Then, seeing that they had caught our attention, they revealed that within each hand was a single apple seed. They bent down and dug a small hole, only an inch or so deep in the earth. The apple seeds were then carefully dropped into each hole and covered with a fine dusting of ash. Their work done, Judy and Jack then laid themselves upon their respective burial sites and brought their knees up into the fetal position in a way such that each was the perfect mirror of the other. And then, as my heart sank, they died peacefully before me. When I awoke, I saw a tree. I could not make out the species of the tree, but I couldn't help but feel that it was somehow inextricably linked to the events I had just dreamt of, as though it had been placed here by one of the characters in my dream. Of course, this is an absurd notion, but assuming this was the case, that the origins of this tree were in consequence of what had just occurred in my dream, then there was one thing that didn't add up. In the dream, there were 2 seeds, one from Judy and one from Jack, but now there was only 1 tree. It seemed to me that of the 2 seeds that were planted, only 1 took hold. Now, I guess the question is that whose seed was it that bore the tree that we see before us today?